sad type of feeling that this particular thing is, the situation that you're in.
What about this time?
Further on up the road, man.
Yeah, right
You gonna give me
on.
some of the bucks, man?
And I'd also like to mention that Mr.
Roby
Brown,
handed Bobby a new contract. Bobby couldn't read, so Roby helped Bobby sign his name on that paper. This simple sentence, recorded by his biographer Charles Farley, hides one of the greatest heists in American music history. Are you enjoying this story about Bobby Blue Bland? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 94.8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year. And don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. While the world celebrated the velvet voice that transformed suffering into poetry, Bobby Blue Bland was signing his own sentence, 0.5 cent per record, when the standard was 4 times more. And that was just the beginning. The truth about the man who shaped modern soul music goes far beyond what the album covers revealed, and the truth is more shocking than you imagined. January 1930, Rosemark, Tennessee, a village of 200 people lost on the American map. Robert Calvin Brooks was born there, son of a single black mother in a segregated America where being poor and black meant carrying 2 crosses. He grew up listening to gospel in small wooden churches where religious fervor exploded in voices that touched heaven. But he also heard country music, those white ballads about lost loves that white folks sang on the other side of the invisible line that divided the races. At 17, his mother took him to Memphis, the promise of a better life. What they found was Beale Street, the pulsing heart of American blues, where music was born from the open wounds of the black experience. It was there, on the corners of Beale, that Robert Calvin Brooks began to sing. First with a gospel group called the Miniatures. Then on the streets for coins. He was hungry for food, for recognition, for a future that looked different from his mother's past. In 1949, to survive, he accepted work as a driver for a young guitarist who was starting to make a name, B.B. King. He drove, carried equipment, and watched. Watched how musicians talked, how they negotiated, how they turned pain into money. He was learning unknowingly the rules of a rigged game, but there's a secret few know. Bobby Bland wasn't born with that deep, velvety voice that would make him famous. In his early years, he sang in falsetto, trying to imitate the gospel singers he admired. His voice was high, almost feminine. Then, in a routine surgery to remove his tonsils, something changed. When he recovered, his voice had dropped. The falsetto had become impossible. What could have been the end of his dreams was, in fact, the birth of a revolution. That new voice, deep, raspy, loaded with a melancholy that seemed to come from centuries of suffering, was exactly what the world needed to hear, even if it didn't know it yet. He began studying the sermons of a Detroit preacher, C.L. Franklin. He copied the way Franklin built emotion, how his voice rose in a shout, that squall that made worshippers writhe in church pews. Bobby transported that into the blues. It wasn't just singing about pain, it was making pain breathe through every note. In 1952, when his name was starting to circulate in Memphis, a letter arrived from the government, military draft. The Korean War was at its height, and America needed black bodies for its wars. Bobby Bland went to Japan, serving in the Special Forces. 2.5 years away from music, from stages, from everything that mattered. When he returned in 1954, Memphis had changed. Johnny Ace, one of the Beale Streeters, that informal group of dreamers that included Bland, B.B., King Roscoe Gordon was blowing up the charts. Duke Records, a Memphis label, was making names. Bland returned expecting his chance. What he found was Don Roby, Don Dedrick Roby, half black, half Jewish, 100% gangster. This is the man who would control the next 20 years of Bobby Bland's life. Born in Houston in 1903, Roby was a professional gambler who had built an empire through intimidation, violence, and rigged contracts. He owned the Bronze Peacock Club, a talent agency, record stores, and now, after acquiring Duke Records, controlled practically all black music in the South. Roby always carried a gun. His business partner Evelyn Johnson admitted, "He always wore a gun. I think he was impressing himself because there were no notches on those guns. It was an image he was living up to." But the legend said otherwise. Jerry Lieber, from the songwriting duo Lieber and Stoller, was blunt. Roby was a gangster who managed his various entertainment enterprises using violence, the threat of violence, and murder. Truth or myth, the result was the same. Nobody crossed Don Roby and walked away unscathed. When Bobby Bland returned from the army in 1954, he found his friend Johnny Ace on top of the world. Ace invited him on his tour. Bland accepted, and with it came the contract with Duke Records, now owned by Roby. Christmas 1954, Houston. Backstage at the City Auditorium. Between shows, Johnny Ace grabbed a gun. They say he liked to play Russian roulette. They say it was just a joke, that he didn't believe the gun was loaded. One bullet, one chamber, one trigger pulled. Johnny Ace fell dead at 25. Bobby Bland was there, saw his friend's body, saw the blood, saw the future that could have been his. The shock was devastating, but the machine didn't stop. Roby simply took Bland and put him in the empty spot left by Ace. And it was then, in 1955, that Bland signed that contract. The contract he couldn't read. Half a cent per record, a brazen theft in an industry that already systematically exploited black artists. But there was more. Roby had a pseudonym, Dedrick Malone. Under that name, he claimed songwriting credits for songs he never wrote. Songs created by Joe Scott, the brilliant arranger who shaped Bland's sound, were credited to Dedrick Malone. All the songs that the musicians in Bland's band composed, Dedrick Malone. The songwriting royalties, the real source of income in music, went straight to Roby's pocket. Bobby Bland, the man whose voice was selling millions, received crumbs, and he couldn't do anything about it. 1957. Farther Up the Road exploded on the charts. Number 1 on the R&B chart. Number 43 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the beginning of a devastating streak. Little Boy Blue in 1958. I Pity the Fool, number 1 in 1961. Turn on Your Love Light, number 2 the same year. That's the Way Love Is, his last number 1 in 1963. 63 hits on the R&B charts between 1957 and 1985. The 13th most successful R&B artist of all time, according to industry surveys. But there's a detail nobody talks about. While Bobby Bland dominated the R&B charts, he never managed to cross over to the white mainstream like his friend B.B. King. His biggest pop chart hit, Ain't Nothing You Can Do, only reached number 20 in 1964. The same week, the Beatles occupied the top 5 spots. White America wasn't ready for Bobby Bland. Or maybe it was, but Roby didn't know how to sell him to that audience. Either way, Bland remained confined to the black market, the so-called Chitlin circuit, those segregated southern clubs where black artists played for black audiences, always with the shadow of racial violence hanging over every show. But what truly tore Bland apart wasn't the structural racism of the music industry. It wasn't the shows in smoky clubs where white men occasionally showed up to see the blacks play. It was something more personal. Joe Scott, the arranger, trumpeter, and musical director who had been at Bland's side since 1958, was the true genius behind the sound that made Bobby Blue Bland famous. It was Scott who created those sophisticated big band arrangements, those brass lines that seemed to cry along with Bland's voice. It was Scott who composed many of the most famous songs. But on the album covers, Dedrick Malone, Don Roby, Scott received a salary, no composer royalties, no public recognition. And Bland knew he was singing stolen songs, knew his success was built on the exploitation of Scott, of Wayne Bennett, the guitarist whose jazzy solos gave that unique touch to the recordings, of all the musicians who made that sound possible. But what could he do? Speaking out against Roby meant ending his career, meant possibly something worse. So Bland swallowed the guilt and sang about betrayal, about pain, about lost loves, because he understood betrayal, because he understood pain, because he was losing a bit of himself every day that passed. Are you enjoying this story about Bobby Blue Bland? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 94.8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year. And don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. 1968, 16 years after the first hit. Bland was at his peak, but something was cracking. Financial pressures, ironically, for a man who had sold millions of records, forced him to dismiss his band. Joe Scott left. Wayne Bennett left. The machine that had worked perfectly for more than a decade disintegrated, and Bobby Bland fell with it. Depression, first slow, then overwhelming. He started drinking, not casually, not socially, drinking as anesthesia, drinking as a way to forget that he had built a career on the back of a fraudulent contract, that he had been an accomplice, unwilling but an accomplice, in the exploitation of his own collaborators. Drinking to forget that Johnny Ace had died at 25 and he was alive, singing other men's songs under Roby's name. The shows became erratic. His voice, still powerful, began to falter. The audience noticed. Critics noticed. Roby, of course, didn't care. He had other artists, other contracts, other dreams to sell and exploit. Bobby Bland was just another product on an assembly line that never stopped. 1971, rock bottom. Bland looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, 51 years old. A lifetime dedicated to music, and what did he have to show for it? Some forgotten hits, a contract that held him hostage, and a bottle of whiskey. In that moment, something broke, or perhaps fixed itself. Bland stopped drinking, simply stopped. There was no public rehabilitation, no drama. He decided that he would either become who he had been, or die trying. The following year, in 1972, something unexpected happened. Duke Records was sold to ABC Records. Roby finally was out of Bland's life. It was as if chains had been cut. With producer Steve Barry and musical director Ernie Fields Jr., Bland recorded California Album in 1973 and Dreamer in 1974. They were different albums, less focused on romantic ballads, more rooted in raw blues. Critics loved it. The audience responded. And for the first time in decades, Bobby Bland felt he was singing for himself, not for Don Roby. In the years that followed, Bland did something few artists achieve. He refused to disappear. While Motown dominated the charts, while funk and Philadelphia soul eclipsed traditional blues, Bland continued. He didn't try to be modern. He didn't try to imitate others' success. He simply kept being Bobby Blue Bland. In 1985, at 55, he signed with Malaco Records, a small Mississippi label specializing in Southern soul and blues. The choice was deliberate. Bland wanted to play for black audiences, not because he despised white audiences, but because he knew where his truth lay. Members Only, his first album for Malaco, was an unexpected success. The title track reached number 54 on the R&B charts. It wasn't a mega hit, but it was genuine. It was his. For the next 28 years, until his death in 2013, Bland recorded 12 albums for Malaco, constant touring, shows alongside B.B. King, the friend who had been his boss in the early days, collaborations with Van Morrison, who idolized Bland and considered him one of the greatest voices of all time. It was a strange redemption. Bland never recovered the money Roby had stolen. Joe Scott died in 1979, never having received the credits he deserved. Wayne Bennett spent his final years playing in small clubs, nearly forgotten. But Bobby Bland was alive. He was singing. And his voice, though thicker, more raspy, carried something it didn't have in the early years. Wisdom. The wisdom of someone who had seen the worst of the music industry and still chose to sing. 1992. Bobby Blue Bland was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The acceptance speech was brief, characteristic of a man who was never one for big words. But one sentence stuck. I sang about pain because I understand pain. Not because it's beautiful, because it's real. There was the secret. Bland wasn't selling nostalgia. He wasn't selling a polished image of black suffering for white consumption. He was simply telling his story, and his story was the story of millions of black artists who built American music and received crumbs in return. His story was about fraudulent contracts, about illiteracy used as a weapon, about how genius can be exploited when you don't have the power to defend yourself. But it was also about resistance, about waking up every day and choosing to sing, even when every note is a reminder of what was stolen from you. It's about transforming exploitation into art. It's about making your pain serve something greater than yourself. June 23rd, 2013, Germantown, Tennessee. Bobby Blue Bland died at home at 83 years old. His wife Willie Martin was by his side. His son Rod, too. In the obituaries, newspapers listed his hits, talked about his voice, about his legacy. Some mentioned Don Roby and the unjust contracts, but few understood what had really happened. Bobby Bland wasn't just a victim of the music industry. He was a survivor who transformed victimization into transcendence. Every time he sang I Pity the Fool, he was singing about himself, a fool who signed a contract he couldn't read. Every time he sang Turn on Your Love Light, he was asking for someone to see beyond the exploitation, beyond the pain, and recognize the humanity that persisted. His funeral, held at First Baptist Church in Memphis, was a celebration. B.B. King spoke, Reverend Jesse Jackson spoke, musicians from Stax Records, gospel legends, all came to pay tribute. Because in the end, what Bobby Bland represented wasn't just an exceptional voice or a collection of hits. He represented the dignity of black American art in the face of systematic exploitation. He represented the choice to continue, even when everything asks you to give up. Today, more than a decade after his death, Bobby Bland's voice continues to echo. Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City was sampled by Jay-Z on The Blueprint. His influence is in every soul singer who mixes gospel with blues, in every artist who sings with an open and wounded heart. But the deepest lesson isn't in the music, it's in the life. Bobby Bland taught that you can be exploited, betrayed, robbed, and still, if you choose, you can transform that pain into something that illuminates the world. He taught that resistance isn't necessarily loud revolution. Are you enjoying this story about Bobby Blue Bland? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year. And don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. Sometimes resistance is simply continuing to make your art when all forces conspire to silence you. And in the end, while Don Robey is remembered as a criminal and Joe Scott is a forgotten name to most people, Bobby Blue Bland remains as a voice, as a testimony, as proof that human dignity cannot be stolen even when everything else is taken from you. Because there are some things that no contract can control, and one of them is the truth that lives in a voice that refuses to lie.